Calling the meeting to order of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, 42nd Parliament, meeting number 76. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, October the 4th, 2017, Bill C-48, an act respecting the regulation of vessels that transport crude oil or persistent oil to or from ports or marine installations located along British Columbia's north coast. Appearing today, we have departmental staff and we have Minister Marc Garneau here for the first hour. So, Minister Garneau, welcome. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and esteemed members of the committee, I am pleased to be here with you again today to speak about a third bill that advances my mandate priorities. I'm sure I hardly need to remind you that we Canadians enjoy some of the most spectacular scenery in the world. Among the many beautiful places in our country, the stretch of rainforest along British Columbia's northern coast is unique. There is nothing quite like it. The thought of this pristine ecosystem being fouled by oil pollution is simply intolerable. That is why I'm here today to speak to the proposed legislation intended to preserve and protect these coastal areas, namely Bill C-48. I'm happy to outline the rationale for Bill C-48, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. The comprehensive measures of the proposed legislation are the result of extensive consultations with Canadians. And while there continue to be differing perspectives, what we did hear loud and clear is that the transport of both crude oil and persistent oils by sea should be prohibited near the pristine coasts of northern BC. The proposed moratorium would cover all ports and marine installations in the area encompassing northern BC and extending from our border with Alaska in the north down to BC's mainland, adjacent to the northern tip of Vancouver Island. Tankers with more than 12,500 metric tons of crude or persistent oil as cargo would be prohibited from stopping, loading, or unloading at ports or marine installations in this area. The definition of crude oil in the proposed legislation is based on the one in the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, which is familiar to the shipping industry. Persistent oils are heavier and stickier. Because of this, they tend to break up and dissipate more slowly. And if they are spilled, they are more likely to cling to birds, wildlife, and shorelines. Examples of persistent oils in the moratorium schedule include partially upgraded bitumen and synthetic crude oil. We may consider changes to the list of targeted goods if a review of the scientific evidence and innovations in the transportation of oil or cleanup technology show that changes are justified. The safety of the environment will always be the main consideration, and any changes would have to be made through a regulatory amendment. We recognize that many communities in the area of the proposed moratorium are not accessible by road or rail and depend on oil to be brought in by ship. To ensure the resupply of these communities and their industries, this act would allow individual shipments of less than 12,500 metric tons of crude oil to continue.
To reinforce how seriously we take this matter, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act also includes reporting requirements and strict penalties for violations. All tankers capable of carrying more than 12,500 metric tons of oil would be required to report on the cargo they are carrying or picking up within the moratorium area. This information would have to be submitted 24 hours before the tanker calls at a port or marine installation. I want to reassure shippers that the reporting burden would be kept to a minimum because we are aligning the new requirements with existing reporting processes. The only additional requirement for shippers would be to report the specific type of oil they are carrying and the amount of oil that would be loaded or unloaded at a port or marine installation in northern BC. With respect to enforcement, Transport Canada already has marine inspectors who enforce existing marine legislation. These inspectors would enforce the proposed Oil Tanker Moratorium Act to ensure compliance. The powers these inspectors would have under this act would be similar to the authorities they have under existing marine legislation, such as the Canada Shipping Act 2001 and the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999. Inspectors would have the authority to board an oil tanker and take samples or conduct tests to verify compliance with the Act. If a marine inspector had reasonable grounds to believe the law had been violated, the oil tanker could be detained. Again, I want to emphasize that the safety of the environment is our top priority in advancing this legislation. Lest anyone doubt that, let me note that we would support this moratorium with an enforcement regime that could result in fines for violators of up to $5 million.
Potential oil pollution are what Canadians want and expect. Canadians help us set the parameters of the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. In 2016, I undertook an extensive series of engagement sessions and met with stakeholders with clear views on a proposed moratorium. I talked to coastal and inland Indigenous groups. I also met with environmental organizations, marine and resource industries, and representatives of affected communities. I met with colleagues from provincial and municipal governments as well. And people across Canada logged on to our website to comment on the proposed oil tanker moratorium. I listened to their views on improving marine safety in Canada and formalizing an oil tanker moratorium. It's clear that Canadians share certain goals to keep our economy strong and protect the environment, and we understand that marine safety is a precondition to sustainable economic development. Madame la Présidente, ce projet de loi...
Madam Chair, this legislation completes our government's larger national strategy to promote marine safety and coastal protection under the $1.5 billion Oceans Protection Plan, which we announced in November of last year. As part of this plan, we are investing in new prevention and response measures based on the latest oil spill cleanup science and technology. Madam Chair and members of the committee, this legislation is long overdue. Canadians have been asking for this for years. Fortunately, it's not too late. Once passed by Parliament, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act will provide an unprecedented level of environmental protection for British Columbia's north coast. The oil tanker moratorium will allow us to preserve this precious ecosystem for the enjoyment and benefit of future generations. We have an opportunity now to accomplish something of historic importance, and we should grasp that opportunity. And so I urge this committee and my fellow parliamentarians to support this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am now ready to take any of your questions.
Go on to Ms. Block.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank you, Minister, for joining us today and your departmental officials. We appreciate you taking the time. Minister, in your mandate letter, the Prime Minister instructed you to formalize a moratorium on crude oil tanker traffic on British Columbia's north coast, working in collaboration with the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard, the Minister of Natural Resources, and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to develop an approach. And given that you received this mandate letter on the heels of your appointment, I'm wondering if you could explain to the committee what exactly you were consulting on, since you already had been instructed to formalize this moratorium.
I thank my colleague for the question. It is one thing to describe a mandate in a few sentences. It is another to put together a piece of legislation. There were a number of options that could be used in order to implement the moratorium, and that involved discussions with my colleagues as well as stakeholders. And the whole objective here was to come up with the best way to implement this moratorium. There were different options that were contemplated. And of course, on the very matter of what kind of hydrocarbons would be included in this moratorium. So there were lots of details to be worked out, and that's where the consultations came into play.
Thank you very much. So again, your mandate letter spoke about developing an approach which you just referenced in terms of developing legislation. So my next question would be, during the consultation process, which your department undertook, and the following deliberations on the substance of those consultations, did your office or the department develop a metrics or determine the weight of a witness's testimony? For example, did your office or the department set about applying a rating of importance to the testimony of those representing an affected community or not?
We took everybody's testimony as being an important contribution to our determination of how we would implement this legislation, this proposed legislation. It meant that we were going to meet with, first of all, the people who live along that coast and who in many cases have been there for millennia. And so we, started with indigenous coastal communities, the Niska, the Metlakatla, the Lakwalam, the Haisla, the Haida, the Heiltsuk. We did extensive consultations with those who live there and who have the most at stake, if I can put it that way. We also met with the shipping industry, because the shipping industry obviously has a very strong presence on the west coast of Canada. We also met with environmental groups who have very strong views on the issue of moratorium. And we engaged also with government officials and at the municipal level, such as this city of Prince Rupert, which is in the middle of this area, and provincially as well. So we were very engaged with everybody, and everybody's input was considered to be important.
Thank you very much. So then I think what I've heard is that an environmental group with an interest in the outcome of a oil tanker moratorium would have the same weight as a coastal indigenous community. Is that what you were saying?
Well, it's it's a difficult thing to say we're going to give this many points to this person's testimony, this many points. What we're looking for is what kind of comments that and recommendations that they make to us, and some recommendations and comments may bring us to places that we hadn't thought about, and may help us to make the decision about which of the options we're going to go forward with. We're certainly sensitive to the fact that we want to develop the economy of our country, but at the same time, we made an election promise in 2015 that we were going to put in place a tanker moratorium, and the important part was how do we do it whilst also balancing our economic priorities.
Thank you. So I guess just one final short question. Would you provide the committee with any documents that relate to how your office or the department evaluated the witness testimony?
I'm not sure let me just say on that particular score, I will consult with my department to see what documentation would be available for that purpose, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here this afternoon. Minister, since 1985, there has been a voluntary tanker exclusion zone, the TEZ, in place along British Columbia's coast. The TEZ ensures that loaded tankers carrying oil from Valdez, as well as Alaska, to U.S. West Coast ports transit west of the TEZ boundary to protect the shoreline. As well, therefore, C-48 will simply be formalizing the status quo with respect to what's been occurring in that area. And this has existed since 1985, and which has not had any discernible negative impacts on international marine trade. So my first question is, in your opinion, and that of the consulted stakeholders that you've spent a lot of time with, including First Nations, will the moratorium provide an important added level of protection to measures already in place?
Thank you for the question, and you're quite right to point out that over 30 years ago a voluntary exclusion zone was put in place for the reasons that you mentioned, and I think that speaks to the fact that there was a clear recognition at that time, which the United States agreed with, that waters in the northern part of BC, I'm talking about the Dixon Entrance, Hecate Strait, the Queen Charlotte Sound, waters around Haida Gwaii, were extremely sensitive, ecologically speaking, and that I'm proud of the fact that that exclusion zone for tanker traffic, as you say, coming from Valdez, has been respected, and there have not been any incidents since then. And this formalizes, as you point out, something that has been in place. It also puts it into legislation, and it also specifically identifies the ports along the coast as being places where tankers cannot come in or leave with the purposes of shipping certain kinds of crude oils and persistent oils. So in a way it's a formalization, but it's also a legalization of it, which is something that we undertook to do in 2015.
Thank you. And Minister, during the 2015 federal election, a commitment to formalize an oil tanker moratorium on British Columbia's north coast, one of the most pristine, biodiverse habitats in the world that will provide a high level of coastal protection around the Dixon Entrance, the Hecate Strait, am I pronouncing it right? Hecate Strait, and the Queen Charlotte Sound. November 2016, Prime Minister Trudeau announced a $1.5 billion ocean protection plan that would improve oil spill responses on the BC coast and create a world-leading maritime safety system. This bill also penalizes and puts into place violations that could reach up to $5 million. In your opinion, how far, or is this going far enough, or can it go further into the future?
I think if one looks at coastal nations, maritime nations, you'll see that the Oceans Protection Plan, which includes over 50 measures and is a $1.5 billion plan, actually takes us to a world-leading level in terms of what it does, in terms of committing to infrastructure to not only monitor our maritime areas, but also to be able to respond much more quickly. It also, if something were to happen. It also sets new standards in many areas. For example, we are going to be spending money, I announced it a week ago, in terms of improving our hydrographic services. So we better understand what's under the water so that we can make sure that we're not going to have collisions because of that, because some of our charts are old. It involves First Nations in a way that has never been done. It's something First Nations wanted to be involved with, something that they are very good at. They're often the first responders, and something that, of course, they have a huge stake in because they live along the coast. It will also be addressing the issue of abandoned and derelict vessels, and some of those elements are coming out at the moment. And it also will continue to work on science. Now, when all of that is taken into account, I think we will have a world-leading system. The North Coast, however, doesn't have all the infrastructure that the South Coast does, or the East Coast, or the St. Lawrence, and it is a particularly sensitive area, and that is why we are putting the moratorium and overlaying on that the Oceans Protection Plan.
Last question, Mr. Minister. With respect to a concern about vessel traffic, of course, our ability to encourage more economy in that area. What percentage of vessel traffic within the voluntary and now the moratorium area is actually carrying petroleum products? How much of this traffic would be subject to the proposed tanker moratorium?
At the moment, within the area covered by the moratorium, the northern coast of British Columbia, there is traffic. There is barge traffic, tug and barge traffic that brings up and down the coast some of the natural resources that are harvested in northern British Columbia. But there are also, and this is in the legislation, and this is why I talked about the 12,500 ton limit for a tanker, there is the requirement to resupply certain very remote communities in British Columbia that are really only accessible either by ship or by air. There are no roads. And so there was a clear recognition that we would need to continue to have some tanker traffic to bring heating fuels and industrial fuels that would allow these communities to continue to prosper. And we gave some very serious thought to what that limit should be. What was our maximum going to be?
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Sorry to interrupt. Ms. Malcolmson, welcome.
Thank you,
to have
Chair.
you here.
Thank you, Minister. Applaud the intention of the bill, especially knowing that it's designed to protect the incredible biodiversity of the Great Bear Rainforest region, Gwaii-Hanass, this long-term New Democrat private members bill, among other members too. So we're really glad to see it coming forward. A concern, though, is that it doesn't do anything to prevent the kind of disaster like we saw a year ago in Heiltsuk territory, the Nathan E. Stewart barge spill, because this bill, C-48, specifically excludes refined oil products from the ban. And even if they were included, the 12,500 ton threshold is high enough to allow them to pass through some of BC's most sensitive waters. So disasters like the Nathan E. Stewart show that we need better regulation and enhanced investments in spill prevention and response in the region. So my question twofold: why should large petroleum tanker barges be excluded from the bill, given the risks that we know already exist in the region? And secondly, is there a scientific case to exclude refined oil products from this legislation?
There are a number of facets to your question. There is a schedule of forbidden fuels, the ones that we call persistent oils. But on the other hand, certain lighter fuels such as naphtha, kerosene, aviation gasoline are not, or LNG are not excluded from this. There needs to be traffic along the coast. The question, because of the resupply that I answered in my last question, the question is how much, what capacity should they be able to carry to do their resupply along this 400-kilometer coast. The Nathan E. Stewart incident pinpointed very, very clearly why we needed to have an oceans protection plan. And I couldn't agree with you more that we definitely needed to take action. And that, unfortunately, that incident, and I went up to Bella Bella and I met with the Heiltsuk and have been in contact with Chief Slett on a number of occasions, highlighted the need for us to put in place measures that would allow us to, A, ideally prevent this kind of incident from occurring, and B, if it did occur, to respond very, very quickly. And we will be taking extremely seriously the recommendations of the Transportation Safety Board, which is currently completing its investigation of this unfortunate event.
Thank you. Also hearing a broad concern that the exemption, which is in Section 6.1 of the bill, allows you as the Minister by order to exempt identified oil tankers from the ban on any terms and for any period of time. And some of the NGOs have called this a loophole so big you could drive an oil tanker through it. Section 6.2 says that the Statutory Instruments Act does not apply to such exemption orders, which removes the requirements that such exemption orders would be published and transparent and made easily available for public examination. So we're concerned that although the Act broadly has great intentions, that this could effectively gut the purpose of the moratorium, Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. So why is that broad ministerial power necessary, given that the bill already provides clear exemptions in the form of distress and vessels under the control of the Minister of National Defence? And why are the ministerial exemption orders excluded from the application of the Statutory Instruments Act, which would give more transparency?
Well, thank you for that question. I would dispute your interpretation of broad powers to do it, and I can assure you this is not a sneaky, sort of surreptitious, stealth way of doing tanker traffic by the minister regularly invoking special powers. This is very specifically focused on one situation, and that is if there is a very serious, unexpected emergency situation that occurs somewhere along the coast on a one-time basis where there is a need for a larger amount of fuel for whatever reason, then the discretion exists with the minister to invoke that exception. But we're not going to be talking about sneakily trying to develop tanker traffic on the north coast of British Columbia after putting in place a moratorium.
So, Minister, thank you.
Seconds left.
Thank you for appearing. There's also a section in this Act which allows you, or through the Governor and Council, to amend the Schedule of Petroleum Products, that you can amend it as you go through. Will you, the government, apply the Statutory Instrument Act to the regulatory authority to add or remove fuel types under the ban? This is a concern from many of the constituents of mine, who some of you know, who have been spending a lot of years and want to get this right, not allow any more loopholes in the provisions that you've provided. Well,
and I'm delighted that that we had the support of the City of Prince Rupert for this moratorium. It's unfortunate you weren't here for my opening remarks, but what I did say very clearly was that we leave it open, the schedule, to make changes to it if scientific evidence shows us that a particular persistent oil can be either handled more efficiently in terms of recovery, because persistent oils, as you know, tend to be stickier and more persistent, and they have a longer time for them to break up, and have therefore a more negative effect on sea life, on bird life, on the shoreline. It also gives us the possibility to add new persistent oils, depending on what is developed in the petroleum industry. So I think it's a very reasonable and sensible thing to have a schedule that identifies, and it's according to very specific measured standards. There are international standards based on the boiling point range of these, so they're quantifiable. And we will keep, who knows what kind of products might be developed 20 years from now in terms of new products for which there's a market, but may also still be persistent oils, in which case we might have to add them to the list.
Thank you, Mr. Minister Garneau. Mr. Iacono.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being with us today. I would like to understand what the concrete effects are of this bill. If you could give us a concrete here's a concrete example. A tanker carrying over 12,500 tons of crude enters into the moratorium zone. What happens after that? Well, if the tanker had, or rather carried over 12,500 tons, and if that tanker entered one of the ports on the north coast of BC, and we do conduct regular inspections, since this tanker would be carrying over 12,500 tons, that ship could be subject to fines of up to $5 million. So in some cases, when a small community needs to be supplied on the North Shore, some tankers will be allowed to carry more than 12,500 tons to supply those communities. But they are not allowed to have over 12,500 tons. So, in fact, that tanker will be half full. If they're carrying more than that amount, if they enter the port or leave the port with more than that amount, they will have violated the Act. Looking at the voluntary exclusion zone for tankers, and if we compare that with the zone contained in the bill, the voluntary zone is larger. Will the voluntary exclusion zone still apply even after this bill is passed? Yes, indeed. The current voluntary exclusion zone, which has been in existence since 1985, will continue to exist. And we've had the cooperation of the United States when it comes to that zone, and tankers carrying significant amounts of Valdez to Alaska along the U.S. coast. However, within the exclusion zone, there will be traffic. And in the case of tankers carrying 12,500 or fewer tons, they will be allowed to circulate because they have to supply the smaller communities along the shore. What were the main data and facts which led the government to decide to protect this specific area, and why are the risks linked to a spill greater in that zone? Well, that area has an ecosystem which is unique in the world. I don't know if you've ever been, but it is incredible. It's an ecosystem which is also very fragile, and there are many First Nations communities who live along that coast. An oil spill catastrophe would have an extremely significant impact, and we saw that last year with Nathan E. Stewart, which was a tug. It wasn't a tanker, but a tug. Further, there are not as many systems on the ground right now to address a spill as there are in the southern part of British Columbia along the coast, where, of course, the largest port in the country is located, the Port of Vancouver. Down in the south, there are many systems, and they, in fact, will be strengthened. They'll be bolstered under our plan. The 400 kilometers of the northern coast are not as equipped to react in case of a spill. Any time left? I will share my time with my colleague.
Oh, okay,
have
so
the
it
floor for
runs
7
right into-
minutes.
Perfect, thank you. Well, Mr. Garneau, many years ago I had the opportunity to go on my father-in-law's fishing boat out of Rupert up to the Portland Canal, and you really do have to see that area to know really what it means and how special it is. And, you know, having taken the ferries down to Port Hardy and stopping in at Bella Bella, you know, again, that's a very special stretch of coast. What was behind the decision to, you know, to bring in this moratorium, given especially that, you know, in the election campaign and in the political side of things, we were also very vocally against the Northern Gateway project. By killing Northern Gateway, wouldn't this have effectively done the same thing as bringing in this moratorium? Did we need this as well?
Our purpose, and the Liberal Party made this decision, in fact, it was on our election platform, and if you go back to 1985, it was under a Liberal government that the exclusion zone was brought in because of Liberal pressure at that time. So there's been a recognition for a very long time that this pristine part of Canada's west coast needs to be protected. So that was the reason for it. The purpose was not to prevent development. In fact, we as a government, as you know, understand that, for example, the people of Alberta and Saskatchewan would like to get their products to Tidewater, and we did approve the TMX pipeline with a number of conditions, which is a fairly normal matter, and we've also approved other pipelines, and we support the Keystone as well, which would get them to southern Tidewater. And so it was not to prevent specifically the building of pipelines to Tidewater, because we support that, and we have put in place the Oceans Protection Plan to complement that economic and environmental side of development. It was to preserve, hopefully for posterity, this very, very pristine area where an incident as small compared to a tanker as the Nathan E. Stewart can have very important effects on the local communities there, as I had the chance to witness myself. You can't eliminate risk completely, and we did not get unanimous consent from all groups that we consulted with, but it is very difficult to obtain unanimous consent from all groups that are involved. But we did get significant, and I would say majority, clearly majority support for putting this moratorium in place. So our job was to put it in place in the most intelligent manner possible.
Now, with respect to the products that are going to be prohibited, again, the legislation opens the way that perhaps those products can be delisted if technology comes along that makes them more acceptable. But what would the technology have to prove in relation to a particular product in order to actually get it delisted?
In terms of the cleanup technology, and unless we can effectively clean up a spill of persistent oils or crude oils very rapidly before we lose it and before it begins to do its damage, then we have to take the necessary precautions to keep it on the list because of the potential effect that it can have. We're continuing to do science on what happens to various persistent oils and hydrocarbons when they land in the water. We need to continue to do that science so that we know as much as possible. We're also looking at how can we, as effectively as possible, recover it, taking into account that factors such as how long it takes before you get there, the temperature of the water, the sea state, the salinity, and all those other things. And so I would say that we're taking a pragmatic approach based on a quantifiable measurement of persistent oils, and at this point in time we're being cautious, but we're not excluding all hydrocarbons as you know.
And that is a point that not all hydrocarbons are excluded. We've had interest from somebody on the West Coast to build a refinery in Kitimat, where they would refine probably bitumen into something else. What would that something else have to be in order to not be covered by this moratorium?
It would have to be something that is not on the schedule.
Okay. Did any of the input that you received, because there were competing interests obviously, and we'll be hearing from some of them in the course of these hearings, is there anything that you heard along the way that caused you to pause and consider whether or not the promise to put in a tanker moratorium was really a good one?
If you're asking me, did everybody 100% agree with the idea of the moratorium, the answer would have to be no. But at no time did I personally, as I went through a very, very extensive consultation. You're seeing this bill now in committee, but we started the consultation at the beginning of 2016, and we were very extensive in our consultations. And at no time did I feel that we didn't have a definite majority of people who supported the moratorium for the North Coast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garneau. On to Mr. Lobb.
Thanks very much, Mr. Minister. there's a document that your department put out about some of the key Indigenous groups that were consulted. Is your opinion for this bill to be a success, do all the groups listed have to consent to this bill?
No. When there are large numbers of communities that are impacted, and there are many communities in the area that we're talking about, you're going to get opinions that can vary depending on which First Nation that you are talking with. And you then have to make a decision about, are most First Nations, what is the sentiment of the majority of the First Nations, and that varies a lot depending on their circumstances and where they're located on the coast.
Okay. Not too long ago, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples talking about the responsibility and the duty to have some consent. So if some communities feel like they have not been adequately consulted, there would be a debate on that, whether they're supportive or not supportive of this bill. I know of a project in my riding that will be many, many years in the making, and they've already started consulting with Indigenous Canadians for something that might be 20 years down the road, and very conscientious about their responsibility to consult. So I look at this. It was started, it says, since January of 2016. I know quite likely the Indigenous communities in my riding would not, or just outside of my riding, would not agree that this would be an appropriate length of time to consult adequately on such a significant impact, both environmentally and economically. So with that being said, would it be fair that we should continue to have committee meetings until we've heard from all concerned Indigenous communities? Would that be something you're open to?
In my opinion, we did a sufficient amount of consultation. It really was, and I have the list of all of the First Nations that we consulted with, and some of them were individual and some of them were represented by larger groups such as the Aboriginal Equity Partners. And again, I will say to you that not everybody agreed. Some agreed violently with the idea of the moratorium. Others had different feelings about it. It's a job as government to make a final decision on this, and some of those decisions are not always going to be totally unanimous, but it is our responsibility to take all factors into account and all stakeholders
I will
account,
just point out, though, Minister,
and then
to
make
that
a final
point,
decision.
with all due respect to that point, I've sat in meetings where I've heard from different organizations that have said this project will not move forward until we have consent from Indigenous Canadians. And so I'm not sure how, on one hand, we have people who've consulted with departments federally saying one thing, and that at a meeting today we hear that we're not going to have 100% agreement. So I'm not sure how on one project we have to have 100%, and on another one it's up to the minister's discretion on when he has consulted enough. And by the way, if we as members of parliament want to invite all the communities listed on the list that you consulted with to confirm what you're telling us here today, we have no opportunity to do that. That's unfortunate.
I would say to you that it would always be great if we had everybody 100% on board for everything that we do in this country. Whether we're dealing with First Nations or other groups in Canada, you as a politician know that one cannot always get unanimity, even though we strive for it in bringing forward our points of view. We did unprecedented consultation with groups, and I might add that I think that we're setting a new standard in this government in terms of consultation. But there is a great practical reality that, that after we have done the consultation and taken in some good ideas and suggestions along the way, that we have to act, and that is what a government has to do.
One last quick question. In your documentation, you also mentioned about the resources available on the southern coast, but are not available on the northern coast for an array of safety precautions. What would you do if the industry came to you and said, we'll cover those costs, Minister. We'll ensure that the same protections are in the north as they are in the south, because obviously that is one of the concerns you've put in your documentation. What would you do then as the minister if they said, we'll provide all the same guarantees that the southern coast has in the northern coast? Would you repeal this at this time?
No, I would not. I would welcome the shipping industry or the industry, its willingness to provide more resources if it chose to do so. And let me be clear, I mean, the Port of Prince Rupert is a growing port. It's a very impressive port that has grown, and it has many natural advantages, and right now it is carrying a lot of shipping to the Asian markets, and we hope to grow that port in the years to come. And there is enormous potential for many other products to be shipped out of the north coast of Canada, and we would like to see that happen. And if the shipping industry or other groups are willing to help increase the resources that are available for monitoring and responding, we would be delighted.
Thank you, Minister Garneau. On to Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here, and I'll be saving a bit of my time at the end to share with my colleague, Mr. Secand. As a follow-up to Mr. Lobb's comments, I find sometimes, and I catch myself on occasion, being guilty of treating Indigenous communities as a singularity who have common interests, which I know is not the case. I do find in the energy industry, proponents are getting much, much better at dealing with individual concerns in communities. When you go through a period of consultation as you have, and there are competing interests and differing opinions, how do you end up with a decision? What's the process that you go through as the minister to determine which side of the coin you're going to fall on?
Well, that's, if I could say, you've encapsulated what government is about. One has to make decisions, and you can't sort of end up falling between two stools. If you're looking at putting a moratorium in place, it can't be a partial moratorium. It has to be a complete moratorium. And yes, you're going to get a range of opinion, but as government, we are always attuned to what the majority of different stakeholders feel about it. And the majority of stakeholders are supportive of the moratorium. That is why, back in 1985, David Anderson, who was the environment minister at that time, created the exclusion zone with the willingness of the United States, and that is why we in 2015 said that we would put in place a moratorium.
Thank you. To shift gears for a moment, when you were describing the unique ecosystem of the coast in question and the sort of pristine nature of it, I couldn't help but think of a certain part of my own riding off of the eastern shore of Nova Scotia, which has hundreds of wild islands that have been untouched, have unique species that can't be found anywhere else in the world, and the local communities have come together to try to build a very impressive tourism initiative for the world to enjoy that coastline. And I invite you to come join me anytime you're available. There's not a similar protection for different other pristine ecosystems. The tanker traffic on the East Coast is almost 3 times the number of vessels, although perhaps not the same volume, most of which land in St. John, come by chance, or importantly for this part of the region, Port Hawkesbury. Do you feel that the measures outlined in the Oceans Protection Plan will both offer the protection we need from a preventative point of view and for a spill response point of view, God forbid it ever happens, to these other pristine ecosystems like the wild islands on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia?
Yes, we do. I mean, our intention was never simply to put a moratorium on the north coast of British Columbia and then do nothing else. The Oceans Protection Plan is an unprecedented plan, and it addresses the southern part as well as the east coast. And you're right about the traffic. There, in some places where the traffic is going through, there is more infrastructure in place to help in case of an incident. But at the same time, we need to improve our performance in terms of protecting the marine ecosystems on the East Coast, and we've already announced some of the elements of that for all of the East Coast, and which, you know, where you come from, and also I'm on the St. Lawrence system, and that's part of it as well, because a spill there can also have some devastating effects as well. So the Oceans Protection Plan is, I think, a way of recognizing that we need to continue to be a commerce country. We are a trading nation, and a lot of what leaves our country leaves by ship. But at the same time, we need to do much more, and that's why the Oceans Protection Plan is in place. And we think that in the areas where there is shipping, that's part of that commerce, we need to beef up our capability, and that's what the OPP is doing.
Thank you. I'll share my remaining minute and a half with Mr. Secant.
90 seconds.
90 seconds. It's nice to see that you're doing well, Minister. I know you were under the weather last time.
Yes, I was in rough shape last time.
I'll be quick with my question. In response to my colleague, you mentioned that the ecosystem off of BC is quite fragile, and it seems the spirit of the bill I can support, and I think certainly most Canadians would. I'm just wondering if you took into consideration operating speeds of oil tankers, or if that was considered, or if that is a consideration.
Well, you bring up a good issue. The speeds, in the sense that, and this is generalized not just to oil tankers, but to any shipping traffic and any part of our coasts. And we had an example of an unfortunate example of that in the St. Lawrence this spring, with shipping going too rapidly along the St. Lawrence and creating enough of a bow wave that it was exacerbating the flooding that occurred here along the St. Lawrence in a place called Yamashish. So we recognize, and this is part of our focus in the Oceans Protection Plan, that ships create bow waves, and those bow waves can affect the shore and can change the shore and can damage the shore. So it's not part of the moratorium, but it is part of our larger science with respect to the Oceans Protection Plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garneau. On to Mr. Lobb.
Okay, one quick question. I'll turn it over to Ms. Block. Just from my perspective with the oil industry, my guess is in the short term what they'll try and do is develop a refinery, whether it's in Prince George or, Prince Rupert or in Kitimat, and use the rail lines there and refine it down to varieties of gasoline, diesel, etc. Is that, I mean, obviously those are excluded in they're allowed to be shipped across. Do you feel that obviously there's a potential for huge increases in tanker traffic of those products? Is that something that you're looking at enforcing down the road to take those off if the volumes become too high? Just like you kind of let us know what you might do in the future.
No, it's a good question. If a company were to get access to a port along the North Coast, and if it were to perhaps send in the pipeline an unrefined product, but then refine it before putting it in a ship, and that product were not on the schedule of persistent oils, then from the moratorium point of view, it would be possible for it to have a traffic or tanker traffic from that port. Obviously, getting it from, let's say, Alberta to the coast and building the refinery, there are other environmental evaluations that have to be done that come under Environment Canada and other ministries. But if those were satisfied and the product that was put in a ship was a lighter, non-schedule hydrocarbon, then that would not violate the moratorium.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So, you know, from our perspective, we've been clear. We've had an opportunity to debate this bill for a couple of hours in the House. We had an opportunity to ask some questions during time allocation. And we've basically said, you know, this doesn't appear to be truly a moratorium on tanker traffic on BC's west coast, because that's going to continue, but that this appears to be a moratorium on the oil sands development and a pipeline that could eventually carry that oil to Tidewater. And so I guess, you know, Canadian oil is extracted and transported under some of the safest and most environmentally strict regulations in the world. Preventing our Canadian oil from reaching customers in other countries only serves to proliferate the use of oil products extracted and transported in less safe and less environmentally friendly ways. And so I guess I'm wondering if you can explain what is to me the strange contradiction in your views, that the proliferation of Canadian oil is bad, but the proliferation of oil from other countries with less stringent regulations is good, because we will keep importing whatever we need rather than developing our own resources.
Well, I have to say I reject the premise of your comment. We think that it's important for Canada to have the capability of selling our natural resources, including oil, to other countries because of the demand. And that is why the TMX was approved with conditions. That is why we support the Keystone. That is why we also approved the L3 line going from Alberta to the northern United States. And these, I think, are very clear indications that we want to allow the economic development of this resource within the parameters that we gave ourselves for the Pan-Canadian Framework and the Paris Accord. And there is every expectation that we will be able to satisfy that. So we are, in fact, in favor of that, but we're also a government that believes that you must and you can balance the environmental side of the equation as well. And we've said this, of course, repeatedly in the House of Commons, and we've taken measures. And we think it's a very sensible thing for us to have the moratorium, have the OPP, and to continue to be supportive of Alberta and Saskatchewan's oil industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Garneau. And Mr. Cullen, we have 1 minute or so left. Mr. Cullen, are you? Yes, Mr. Cullen has left the room. So, all right. So he's not in the room, right? Well, I don't see him at the table, nor I don't see him in the room, so unfortunately it's only a minute left. So, Minister, thank you very much for being here with this hour. I appreciate it. I know you're leaving your officials here with us for the upcoming remainder of time, so thank you very much. We will suspend for a moment. Reconvening our meeting. We have with us our departmental officials. Would you like to introduce yourselves and your position?
Good afternoon. I'm Natasha Raskanen, Assistant Deputy Minister at Transport Canada for Transformation. Jennifer.
And I'm Jillian Grant. I'm Senior Counsel at Transport Canada Legal Services.
Hello, and I'm Jennifer Sachs. I'm Acting Director General of Marine Policy.
For being here, we'll open the questions with Ms. Block.
I'm sorry, I've lost my here.
We're not counting your time yet.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So in the news release put out when this bill was introduced, and I think it was dated May 12th of 2017, it states vessels carrying less than 12,500 metric tons of crude or persistent oil as cargo will continue to be permitted in the moratorium area to ensure northern communities can receive critical shipments of heating oils and other products. Can you tell us approximately how many tons of oil are currently shipped to these northern communities each year? And then has there been a serious spill in northern BC involving one of these ships where thousands of tons of oil was spilled?
Thank you for that question. I can't give you an answer in tons. We certainly looked at traffic and volumes and types of products that are being shipped in that area, both for community resupply and for industry resupply. And based on that analysis, this was the limit that made sense to permit the kinds of shipping that are taking place currently. And to my awareness, there's not been a serious accident in the north of BC before.
Okay, so you couldn't tell us in tons how much oil is being shipped into these northern communities, but you said you did look at traffic. So approximately how many of these smaller vessels would be traveling into these northern communities carrying around that 12,500 ton benchmark?
So for vessels that are carrying less than 12,500 metric tons, that includes tugs and barges, and they're traffic and trips that occur for that community industry resupply purpose. What we have done is there's a full study that we did commission on the community and industry resupply, and that's public on our website, that does a full analysis of all the type of traffic, both for the community purposes as well as industry, and looks at the various types of products as well. Just because some of that is more regular traffic, some of that is more occasional for industry. So that full analysis is public on our website.
So you don't have that number for me in terms of how many smaller vessels would be traveling in?
I don't have a specific number because there are quite a number of, different various sized tugs and barges that go. And so for the actual specifics, to be able to answer that, the best place would be through this study. But
okay, thank you. So are these smaller vessels governed by the same Canadian rules and regulations as the large supertankers when they offload their cargo in Vancouver or on Canada's East Coast?
Well, I'm not a marine safety expert, but based on my understanding of the legislative regime, I would say that generally speaking, the rules with respect to loading and unloading of barges and tankers are the same, yes.
Okay. So perhaps you could tell me, how do Canada's rules and regulations with respect to the loading and unloading of oil and petroleum products compare to the rules and regulations in other G7 countries?
Well, Canada's rules with respect to oil tankers are largely set by the International Maritime Organization, and they're set out in the international convention from which we draw the definition of crude oil. It's called MARPOL in the its short form. So these rules are negotiated at the IMO, and Canada implements them through its own law, and that would be consistent really with the rest of the world.
Okay, so you may have just answered this for me, but perhaps, so is it your estimation that there are the same rules and regulations in place to govern the unloading or loading of oil on Canada's west coast as on Canada's east coast? There would be no difference there. There's nothing in terms of the marine environment or anything like that that might suggest that you needed to do something different.
What I can say is that the regulatory regime which governs oil tankers, which includes barges, is the same across the country.
Okay. 1 minute. I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And when the minister was sitting in that seat, I was attempting to get some history as well as reasoning behind this bill. And I think he was very clear in response to my questions on why we're bringing this to the table. But I want to dig a bit deeper in the weeds with respect to a lot of what has been identified throughout Bill C-48. And the first question I have is how is this region different from other parts of Canada where tanker traffic is currently permitted?
Well, I think the minister actually did highlight that as well, but this is a very pristine region, a unique ecosystem, and other parts of Canada where there is significant various kinds of marine traffic have a lot of precautionary and infrastructure and response mechanisms already in place, so that is a significant difference that is in play.
Thank you. And is it likely that Bill C-48 will direct investment and traffic away from Canada and into the United States?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Is it likely that Bill C-48 will direct investment and traffic away from Canada and into the United States?
No.
It's not likely? Good. As well, and this question is very important because we've heard some comments from different individuals about this with respect to the future. And in the event of new technology for increased safety and in the movement of petroleum products, as was the case with the introduction of double-hulled tankers. We understand what happened in Valdez, Alaska, when it was a single hull, and of course we've seen the outcome of that. But with respect to future technologies, double-hull tankers, would this provision allow Transport Canada to in fact amend the schedule of oil products subject to the oil tanker moratorium?
The minister was quite clear as well that the schedule to the moratorium bill could be amended through the regular regulatory process should innovations in science and evolution of products and so on warrant products to be added to the schedule or to be removed from the schedule. So that is something that would be considered. As we all know, science evolves continually, and that is an important consideration to take.
And if we can, and I know the minister answered this somewhat, but I'd like to hear it from you as well, because for the most part we understand that you folks are the ones with the feet on the ground and really accepting a lot of the input from the public consultations that had occurred. And with that, can you be a bit more specific in terms of who you've met with, some of the comments that were made, both good and bad, with respect to bringing us to where we are today?
Well, there was a range of input that we received across the different consultations and engagement sessions. Certainly, I would say everybody is interested in enhanced marine safety and in enhanced environmental protections and in making sure that economic opportunities are also importantly considered. So there was an awful lot of similarity in those thoughts. What wasn't always, certain groups are put more weighting on one of those elements than others, and but they all consider them important elements to our society and to Canada as a whole.
And we always try to look at things through a triple bottom line process when it comes to environment, economic, social, and I can see this sort of establishing that balance. So my last question is, do you see this process more so than the actual bill itself, but the process and brought us to the point where the bill is? Do you see it, or can it be used as a template in other areas to further our responsibility, especially when it comes to the environment, while still trying to balance the economic and the social side of it throughout the country?
My view is not necessarily the right take on this, in that officials do not provide views. What I really believe, what is fundamental to this is the assessment that from all of the scientific assessments, the work that we do, we take that into consideration as we go forward. So absolutely, lessons learned are critical.
So bottom line is a lot of it has to do with being science-based.
They're evidence-based.
Evidence-based. Right. Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for our officials for being here. I know governments like to, it's the nature of politics, to take credit for stuff, especially if they're attempting to do the right thing. I'd cite a lot of the success in terms of this. It's been a 40-year conversation, actually, in the northwest of British Columbia. When the first pipeline was proposed and the first tankers were then considered in the North Coast, realizing the particular nature and the tricky nature of sailing a super tanker through the Douglas Channel, and Minister and I have spoken a lot about that. I'm wondering a couple of things. So well, I'll give credit to the government for introducing the bill. My credit mostly rests with the people who spent the last, some cases, 40 years struggling for this. The precautionary principle, does it rest within this legislation in any formal or informal way?
The approach to the schedule to the Act was based on the precautionary principle, and certainly encompasses a range of petroleum products that are at the heavier end.
So when we were going through hearings, the National Energy Board hearings around Northern Gateway, because that was the example that was most discussed about whether there should be a tanker ban now, one of the challenges that people in the Northwest, where I represent, had was in trying to establish just the qualities of the product proposed to be moving through the pipeline. That diluted bitumen was a relatively recent actor on the stage within the Canadian petroleum industry as a large mover of volume. When we were questioning federal officials, both from your department, from the fisheries department, as to the nature of diluted bitumen and how much was understood about how it reacted in water, fresh water, salt water, did it sink, did it float? These are, of course, incredibly important things to know when trying to determine how you would clean something up if there was ever a spill, especially for a place like the northwest of British Columbia, where the value of the rivers, the value of the ocean is paramount, culturally, economically, socially. Do we now have established evidence within the department as to the qualities of bitumen, how it weathers over time, and what is recoverable if in the event of a spill, either in fresh or salt water?
This is an area that is not under the purview of the Department of Transport. It is our colleagues in Natural Resources and in Environment Canada who do some of this work.
How do you then apply that precautionary principle, I guess, is my question, as to what to list and what not to list? Does it come from Natural Resources, and have they provided testing to you to establish the parameters of cleanup and viability when considering something like a tanker ban?
We work very closely with our colleagues. We also relied very heavily, importantly, on international standards under the various international elements, and also under the Oceans Protection Plan. There are investments into ongoing research in this area.
I guess that's what I'm seeking right now, is that your department, the transport, is handling this bill through. You're relying on those other agencies and evidence. Do you have evidence that you can give to the committee upon which you relied to establish the parameters of this tanker ban with regards to products that can and cannot be shipped?
Well, we can in terms of evidence, it was an analysis of the types of products, looking at internationally based definitions, which ones are and science-based definitions, which ones are the heaviest and most persistent, given all the current knowledge scientifically, and those are the ones that are listed on the schedule.
So on that, and I'll stop here, Chair, but on that, are we allowed with the confirmed knowledge that when something like diluted bitumen, as it's currently composed, presents itself to a salt or ocean water environment, it in fact sinks rather than floats? Do we know that?
I'm not able to answer that question myself directly.
Would you be able to provide the committee on any information the department has, if you don't have it available right now?
I can give you, sure, and we do actually have some NRCan folks here, but...
I'm not sure how to proceed, Chair, because I know with limited time, if we want to call forward NRCan officials, let's put it this way, if we can endeavor to get a commitment from your department to provide that information from Natural Resources Canada, that would help us greatly, just in knowing how it is the department goes around making the determinations that you do when setting out a tanker ban here or in any other.
Sure, we will follow up with
thank
that.
you. I don't know if there's any time. I'm sorry to my colleagues.
You still have a minute almost.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess, I wasn't here for the minister's presentation and questions, so, and he may have answered this in his words. I just wanted to ask again about this ministerial exclusion, why we need this in this bill, what kind of situations might you envision that you felt it was needed, and will the public even know if this exclusion is exercised?
So the minister did speak about this. This exclusion is consistent with similar, very constrained emergency exclusion capacities that are provided to ministers in other safety legislations, and it is to be used in one-off, unique circumstances like perhaps a natural disaster or even others that we may not at this point contemplate. And in that instance, it is important that a minister have the capacity to act fairly quickly and allow very specific situations to continue.
And are there
Thank you very much. Now
That's okay.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a reflection, just listening to the testimony that our witnesses are able to provide in answer to the questions, good questions coming out, and it occurs that maybe as a committee we should step back and perhaps invite some fisheries and oceans people to come here. I think that would be quite useful because there are a number of questions that they're better prepared to answer than folks from transport. So with that in mind, I'll try and ask a few questions that hopefully you can relate to simply from where you're coming from. What do you know about the products that are in the fuel tanks and the barges that would be permitted to go up and down the exclusion zone?
Currently, there's a mix of different petroleum products. There are persistent and non-persistent products that are going up and down. The moratorium and that schedule that we have in this act are specifically pertaining to persistent oil products, and what's been used there is an internationally recognized definition used by the International Oil Pollution Compensation Funds that uses a boiling range test to really identify those heaviest, most persistent products.
Oh no, I understand that. Yes, the definitions are set out on the schedule, but what you're telling me is that these will be present in approximately what ratio? Say I've got a tugboat pulling a barge that's refueling, stops up and down the coast. How much of the restricted material, percentage-wise, would be present?
Sorry, in vessels over 12,500 metric tons and
the ones that would
Okay.
be allowed to go up and down the coast. Do you have any estimate? If you don't, please just say
Right.
so.
No, Thank you very much for that question. Actually, that study that I referred to earlier, I would welcome you to go and refer to that study that we undertook on community and industry resupply, because it looks very specifically at the types of products, ranging from slack, wax, liquid pitch, petroleum, diesel. There's a variety of products, and in what quantities those are being transported, both above and below that 12,500.
Right. One of the questions I'd really like to probe with DFO or Coast Guard or both is in fact the whole regime around tugboats, because we had that tugboat go down near Bella Bella. There's news today that another tug sank at Squamish on Tuesday, and guess what? It sank again today off Port Atkinson. So I think we have a little problem there too that we need to kind of drill into, pardon that, to in fact see what the vehicles that would be permitted to operate in that area, in fact, their whole safety regime. It's my understanding, for instance, that the tug that sank near Bella Bella didn't have a pilot on board, wasn't required to. These are things that we need to drill into, but I don't think it's necessarily your bailiwick that would necessarily deal with that, or would it?
Well, that is Transport Canada bailiwick, but it's not
yours.
Not mine.
I hear you.
So the safety elements of shipping are within Transport Canada's elements.
And the inspection and enforcement, I presume, would fall to the Coast Guard?
It depends on the situation. We do have marine inspectors, and marine inspection and enforcement in many instances would be Transport Canada as well.
And so you would, if you detected a ship that was over a certain size, would it be Transport Canada people that would go out and do the inspection?
In terms of carrying some of these products, perhaps, yes, it would.
What complement of inspectors do you have on the West Coast?
I would be able to answer that question as a follow-up.
And particularly up north where this is necessary.
I don't know right now.
Are you familiar with a new process that CN Rail has developed to modify undiluted bitumen?
Yes, we have seen preliminary proposals around that, as have our NRCan partners, the science part of NRCan analysis.
And what have you concluded thus far?
There are no conclusions thus far. It is still very preliminary in terms of getting a full sense of what this product is and how it would behave in various situations in salt water.
Do I have any time? 1 minute? Quick one. I know that the Coast Guard, through the reopened Kitsilano Coast Guard base in Vancouver, is set up to train Indigenous groups up and down the coast to participate in everything from marine rescues to monitoring to spill response. Would Transport Canada consider including that process in its own process on inspection?
The Oceans Protection Plan has a lot of components of working with Indigenous groups to develop and to help work through the various marine safety enhancements. There are also opportunities for engagement as a whole of our actual participation, I should say, in various elements, and we're working through that with communities. There are education components as well, so there are many such components already underway.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much for being here. I want to just follow up a little bit on the issue of enforcement that my colleague was just chatting about. I find that the whole landscape is a little bit hard for me to picture how you develop a regulatory scheme when there's sort of been this, on a voluntary basis, that this really hasn't been happening. How do you have an idea of what the actual cost would be to implement an inspection and enforcement regime once the moratorium kicks in?
Well, the way we foresee the enforcement regime working is that there are already marine safety inspectors in northern BC. They have offices, for example, in Prince Rupert and I believe in some other communities there. They board ships for a number of reasons to verify compliance with a number of laws, principally the Canada Shipping Act and its regulations. So we would see them enforcing the moratorium regime in the same way. They would, as part of their duties to look at ships generally, they would also verify compliance with the moratorium and take steps as necessary.
So the same people that are on the ground now would still be there in the future. So there's not necessarily an increased cost to the new inspection and enforcement measures.
No, I believe that Transport Canada's Marine Safety Division sees doing this as a regular part of their existing duties.
On a related issue, dealing now with compliance measures, there's a handful of different mechanisms included in the bill, things like creating offences, liability of the directors and officers, new seizure powers. How do we know this is actually the right mechanism? I find it really difficult to understand how we arrived at a compliance mechanism when you're not dealing with sort of a sweeping problem where you can assess whether it's been effective in the past on a go-forward basis. Could you offer comment?
Well, the way the bill is constructed is it tries to be, I suppose you could say, precautionary in the fact that, for example, we have a reporting requirement. So vessels will report before they come, and the hope there is that we will prevent tankers that are not compliant with the moratorium from coming to our ports. With respect to the other sections in the bill that you mentioned, this is really consistent with how we generally enforce marine safety legislation. So the idea behind the enforcement regime really was to create something that our inspectors would be familiar with and would be able to enforce as they do other legislation.
Okay, if I can change subjects just to the 12,500 figure. I know the aim here is to ensure that super tankers aren't coming in, but you're not going to deny communities that don't have access by road to the fuel that they need. How did you land at the 12,500 number? Is it an assessment of the fuel consumed by these communities today?
We looked at the types of traffic and the volumes of various products that are shipped into northern BC for both community resupply and industry resupply, and on that basis set the threshold. And as my colleague mentioned, there's a very detailed study published on our website that gives quite a lot of analysis of the types of traffic and the types of ships that currently traverse and what they carry.
And are you confident that the 12,500 figure on different times of year when fuel consumption might be different is going to make sure that these communities aren't denied access to fuel they need to get by?
Yes, we are.
Okay. On the actual definition of crude in the schedule that lays out, I know we've more or less adopted the International Convention to determine what sort of persistent fuels were going to be subject to the moratorium. Had Transport Canada considered other products that may have ended up on the list and decided not to include them?
No, all products that are persistent in that range, petroleum products, are included in the definition. And
are there other substances that Transport Canada was or is looking at adding in anticipation of maybe something new that we could be worried about in the future, or you're comfortable with
none at this time? The point is that if such products emerge,
okay,
we will assess them and do the scientific analysis with our colleagues and determine what is the best course forward.
And do I have time for a final question? Well, yes, okay. On the issue of exemptions, the minister described that there's not going to be some unscrupulous attempt to have a great number of ships come in under this exemption power. Can you describe what safeguards would be in place to ensure that the application of the exemptions are in fact limited, or at least applied consistently, not limited?
Well, as you'll know from reading the text of the bill, it talks about an identified oil tanker, and it provides a test for when exemptions can be granted, which is predominantly to address problems with community or industry resupply. There is the broader test of the public interest, which we included in there just because, A, it mirrors what appears in other legislation, but B, it's impossible to predict situations where we might need to use the exemption, so we wanted to provide enough flexibility to deal with an unanticipated situation. As I say, however, traditionally these exemption provisions are interpreted quite narrowly. Certainly the legal advice that we usually provide to ministers and officials is to stick very closely to the test.
And okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Mr. Law.
One question I have just to start out with is, will Canadian ships, tankers, super tankers, will they be allowed to, say, go up to Valdez, Alaska, and pick up a load of diesel fuel and come through this area, say on their way to Washington or San Francisco or Los Angeles? Would they be able to do that?
Well, it depends on what kind of product they're carrying.
Diesel fuel.
There are many types of diesel
Light
fuel.
diesel fuel.
So
light diesel fuel, gasoline. But I'd like, just for the example, I noticed in your example you list light diesel oil, so that's allowed. So if I have a super tanker full of 318,000 metric tons, can I pick that up if I'm a Canadian tanker in Valdez and work my way through and deliver it to California? Under C-48, will I be allowed to do that?
But we do have the voluntary tanker exclusion zone that applies, and that is been in place since 1985. So tankers would go outside of that line.
Okay, but if it's allowed under, like it's under C-48, doesn't it allow for that? Doesn't it allow for diesel fuel to come up?
If the product is not on the schedule, then it is not covered by the moratorium. If it's not crude oil in the legislation and is not in the schedule, it would not be covered by the moratorium legislation.
So you could drive a tanker through there, right?
Except tankers are supposed to follow the voluntary exclusion
Voluntary, right.
And you would have to ensure, sorry, it depends on the volume that you have as well, right? So it would have to be a tanker where the persistent, I mean, if it's 12,500, as long as it's non-persistent oil, so if it's only light diesel and it's the only product it's carrying, then that would be permitted. But if it is carrying persistent oil as well above that 12,500, then it would not be.
That was what I was asking, though. If I have a super tanker with 318,000 metric tons of light diesel oil that's allowed under C-48, can I drive in and up? Can I drive my boat up and down? Can I do that?
The products, again, anything that's not on the schedule can be transported.
Well, that seems like a yes to me then, I would say. So my next question is then, what scientific studies has the department done, has environment done, has NGO, environmental groups done, to weigh out the environmental risks and we've evidence-based scientific studies to say, okay, if we have a terrible spill of 318,000 metric tons of light diesel oil versus 12,500 of any of the other ones prescribed in your bill, is there scientific evidence that we can look at to say, okay, the devastation is a 10 out of 10 for one, and for another example, it's 2 out of 10. What studies are out there for that? Because I think probably that should have been done or been based on that. So is there an answer for that one?
Go ahead.
I think it's important that this Moratorium Act is an additional precautionary measure, and it is one of multiple measures that are in place. So there is the tanker exclusion zone, and so laden oil tankers from Alaska to West Coast ports in northeast United States do abide by this. This is something that is monitored, and consistently we have seen that industry does abide by that tanker exclusion zone. And so this Moratorium Act is a complementary measure and is an additional measure to provide that additional protection and to the environment.
Okay, well, we can dig further into that later. One other question I have before my time runs out is, does transport work with the Department of Indigenous Affairs on the consultation process, or do you have your own in-house group that works to be able to make sure they've adequately consulted with Indigenous Canadians?
The answer is actually we have both. We do both. We work very closely with INAC, and we have folks in our own department who have expertise. And we continue through the Oceans Protection Plan in particular as an example within, as a whole of government national program that we are building new partnerships and continuing to work with all Indigenous nations.
Duty to consent, does that come up in the discussions?
It has not come up in any discussions that I have been, the direct question of consent.
Okay, that's interesting too.
45 seconds left.
45 seconds. What other things can we look at here? One other quick one is the support west of Haida Gwaii, and for other than Canadian tankers, Russian tankers, American tankers that break down, what supports are proposed here to beef up the support for a tanker that breaks down en route? Because I think there's maybe some lacking supports there.
Well, there are a number of measures that are already in existence, and Canada's marine safety record has been very good. But as the Minister indicated, the Oceans Protection Plan is bringing additional marine safety improvements and to fill some of the gaps where they may have existed. So there will be certain rescue tug capacity that is going to be available. Coast Guard has a number of additional enhancements to their ships under the Ocean Protection Plan. So those are examples of the various marine safety enhancements that are coming.
Thank you very much. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk a bit more about, I'm going to go back to that triple bottom line, and we've talked a lot about today, environment. But I want to get into the economic side a bit and the social side vis-a-vis jobs. Has there been, being the status quo throughout the past many years, since 1985, and now just sort of solidifying through the moratorium, has there been a shift, albeit there's a lot of traffic, I'm sure, that can't go there anymore to bring the oil, that go to other ports? Has there been, or can there be, a shift or a balance to return to this area some of the otherwise traffic or what's the word, expanded traffic from those other areas back to this area to balance out that economy?
Well, certainly I will echo what the Minister said. There are a lot of work with the Port of Prince Rupert where enhancing and working to build greater shipping, to allow for shipping, not for the products that are not permitted under the moratorium, but for a variety of other products that are supporting the economy.
So let's attach a how to that, how we can do that. Now, the Minister, as I'm sure you recognize, is now embarking on a transportation strategy for the entire country, and with that has established trade corridors, or a process of which is going to establish and recognize trade corridors nationally. So do you think it would be prudent upon that process to then, I won't say force, I'll just say facilitate a dialogue between Prince Rupert, Vancouver, and other ports in the West Coast, a process that would otherwise identify strengthened areas for added economy when it comes to who should be doing what, versus relying on them to do it? Because you know just as well as I do, competition is competition is competition. So with that, would it be prudent upon us through that process, through that establishment of that strategy, to actually facilitate that so that therefore we can get that economic balance across the West Coast?
I believe those dialogues are going on, and certainly a lot of the work that happens in terms of transportation corridors and having as efficient and safe a transportation system. If there are any places that there are blockages or inefficiencies for whatever reason, a lot of conversations go on to identify those and to work through them in a collaborative manner.
And if I can just make a comment before I punt it over to my colleague, Mr. Hardy. I think the advantage to that is not only for the areas individually in terms of economy and social, but equally, if not more important for the or emphasizing the need to have the customer recognize those or strengthened areas and the advantages they would have to in fact do business in those areas if in fact that distribution and logistics network is more formalized versus not. When you go out there and you're trying to work with three separate versus one individual that already has it established, it would be much easier for the customer as well. So, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. How much time do we have? 2.5. Good.
Yeah, ask her, she gives you more time.
Is it fair to say that the Indigenous groups that are in support or were in support of not having a moratorium, so in other words against having a moratorium, some of whom we'll speak with, in the course of our deliberations. Are their interests primarily financial, economic? Would that be safe to say?
I wouldldn't wish to presume to interpret their interests. I believe the kind of messaging we heard, all groups were very interested in environmental protections and economic opportunities.
Perhaps out of fairness, maybe we should have asked all of you, what band of this issue you actually were more directly engaged with, rather than asking you questions that really you find very difficult to answer. So what part of this were you actually doing the deeper dive into? As
what part of the proposed legislation?
Yes.
Well, we certainly talked about the principles and the approach to working through this moratorium. I think it was clear. We got lots of feedback, as the minister indicated. There were various Indigenous groups, environmental, non-governmental organizations, the oil and gas industry, stakeholders of other kinds, Canadians. We had a website as well. So we did engage on a whole lot of parameters.
So you did speak to producers as well as shippers?
Yes.
And people who live in the area?
We're going to try and make sure we get Mr. Falk and Mr. Cannings in before we have to deal with some other issues. So please, Mr. Falk.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for coming. Just a question, how long has this voluntary moratorium been in place?
It was established in 1985.
Okay, so 32 years roughly. You indicated before you didn't know how many inspectors you had on the coast there, but I'm presuming there are Transport Canada inspectors that do ensure compliance with the moratorium. Have there been any infractions in the last 32 years?
There have not. Not of laden tankers. There have been a couple of instances of empty tankers going within, but that is permitted.
Right, so really no infractions. So doesn't it kind of seem like this is a solution looking for a problem?
This is an additional protection that the government has chosen to put in place.
Okay, it just seems like a lot of energy and effort expended on something that isn't an issue. But that's it. That's the only question I had.
Okay, Mr. Cannings.
Well, just I'd like to follow up on that, maybe from the other side, and forgive me, again, I'm new to this and haven't heard any other testimony, and that is, you say there's this voluntary exclusion area outside Haida Gwaii, and if it's, even if it has been working for umpteen years, I'm just wondering, is there a reason why it wasn't included in C-48? Because it sounds like this is something on top of that voluntary exclusion.
That's right. The moratorium is an additional protection. The government made a commitment to formalize a moratorium, and this is the delivery of that commitment.
Right, but the voluntary exclusion of big tankers coming down that coast, or the big tankers going up, that's
a mechanism that is complementary to the moratorium.
Is there any reason it wasn't included in C-48? Since it seems to have been working and everybody's fine with it.
It's a voluntary agreement with the United States that is working very well. So,
do we have the power to include a ban on big tankers coming through there from the United States?
No, not under international law.
So what's the
these are, just to explain it maybe more simply, the voluntary exclusion zone has existed for over 30 years and is functioning very well. In addition and complementary to it, the government has enacted its commitment to formalize this moratorium, and the two are seen as acting in tandem.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess my point is, could we have included the force of that voluntary exclusion in C-48 do we have the,
Go ahead.
and
I'll
if
ask
we
the
have, why didn't we? I guess
International law expert can comment on that.
Well, I would say that there are certain international law limitations to outright preventing tankers from transiting our coast, which is
Right.
what effectively these tankers
Right.
would be doing.
Yeah. Okay. Do we do things when bells ring, or what?
Well, the bells have started. If with the permission of the committee, we could continue for 15 more minutes. We have some committee business to do and a discussion.
Fine with.
So is everybody okay that we continue on for 15 more minutes so that we can have a discussion as well as adopt the budget? Do you want to, you've got another half a minute if you have another question.
Okay.
You're all right? Okay. All right. To the witnesses, thank you very much for being here. You can slip out if you like, and we will deal with some of the committee discussion that we need to deal with. Do I need to suspend or not? So we have a budget before you for the beginning of this study. We may have to come back for additional funds, but this is what we're putting forth now. Request for $37,300. Any questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor? It carries. Opposed? Carries. In this few minutes that we have, I believe Ms. Block wanted to make a suggestion.
Well, yes. With all due respect to the witnesses that we've had for this last 45 minutes, I think that it was obvious that they could not answer a number of the questions that we had in regards to this study. I think there's a good reason for that. Obviously, in the minister's mandate letter, he is charged to work with a number of other ministers and departments to formalize this moratorium. So I would be happy to suggest that we look at inviting some of the departmental officials from other departments to come and appear before us. However, I know that we've already submitted our witness lists, and so our 7 days may already be full, and so I'm just not sure how we want to manage that.
Well, let me just suggest that, what are we talking about? Which departments are we thinking about? That would be helpful. Mr. Hardy?
Well, certainly the DFO and Coast Guard.
Okay.
Definitely, because they'll have a much greater fix on the nature of traffic that's there, which is starting to bubble up as a concern for me.
Okay, because we've agreed to 7 meetings. The question would be, we'd have to try and fit where possibly the clerk has got an opening at this particular time, where we could try to fit them within our existing structure of our 7 meetings.
So when you talk about what our clerk has already done and where there are openings, is that right? Maybe is that because we've already approached or contacted all of the witnesses on the list and are still trying to see how to make it work and how to schedule it? Okay, because I would suggest natural resources, perhaps if we didn't have to do that transition, would have been good to hear from. I think even INAC, I think would have been somebody that we would have wanted to have some conversation with about the consultation process. But I just put that out there. I know it also says that the minister was to work with the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. So I'm not suggesting that we have panels with each department, but if you had a panel with somebody from each department that absolutely maybe has been tasked with working on this legislation or on this issue with the Minister of Transportation, that it might just be an hour where you have the 4 or 5 ministries represented, so that any questions that weren't able to be answered by transportation would be able to be answered by those other departmental officials.
So, and what the idea would be for the clerk to try to find a meeting, an hour of one meeting or whatever, in order to invite variety of the folks from these different departments. So we'd have to try to work it into the schedule as soon as we can. I'm sure we can. We're not adding, no. We're going to find a meeting block, at least for an hour, where we could have folks from these various departments that could be here to help give the committee additional information. Yes.
And I'm good with that as long as we're not removing some of the other suggested witnesses from the list to do that.
We may have to add an extra half an hour one night, if that's all right. I'll make sure to talk to you about that before I add the extra half an hour on. All right, so we'll try very much and try and accommodate the desires. Mr. Fraser.
I was just going to suggest, and I want to be sensitive to people's schedules, that if we had to add an hour on to the end of one of the meetings, if it proves to be an impossible task for the clerk to schedule it, that would be fine from my perspective. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I think that's a sensible solution if we need it.
Mr. Hardy?
Just in deference to what I've picked up along the way, probably on a Tuesday would be better because there's a lot of folks that are getting out of Dodge as soon as this one's over on Thursday. So.
Exactly, for all of us. Okay, thank you all. Yes?
On that, would there ever be the possibility of deciding to meet for 3 hours on a Tuesday and 1 hour on a Thursday? Would we have the flexibility or the autonomy as a committee to meet for 3 hours on a Tuesday and 1 hour on a Thursday? And I get that this meeting time, people are always bumping up the need to get to the airport. So
a Tuesday and no hours on a Thursday.
I would, yeah.
Yeah, good suggestion.
Just something
Let's
to think about.
think about that, and on Tuesday maybe we'll raise that issue and see if it's something that Mr. Chong, who's a regular committee member, I wouldn't. Mr. Chong has pretty strong feelings about his time at committee.
I'm sure he'd agree.
So we'll have a further discussion possibly.
Why, and we are. As per the last meeting, how cooperative at least I was.
Okay, move adjournment. Thank you all very much.